I'm Kyle Malnati, your host of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. At Calibrate, we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. My personal mission is to encourage, empower, and educate you by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. Today's show features the Land Geek, Mark Poldolsky. Mark, thank you for joining us today on the podcast.
Kyle, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure. The Calibrate Real Estate Podcast goes through a lot of different interviews with different guests. We have yet to have someone that's so focused on land that they call themselves the Land Geek. I have to ask you, besides obviously writing a book about being dirt rich, how in the world did you become the Land Geek?
So Kyle, if we rewind the tape, oh my gosh, the 2000, I was a miserable, micromanaged, overstressed 45-minute commute to work and back investment banker, specializing in mergers and acquisitions with private equity groups. And it got so bad for me, Kyle, that I wouldn't get the Sunday blues anticipating Monday coming around. I'd get the Friday blues anticipating the weekend going by really fast and having to be back at work on Monday. So my firm hires this guy, and he's telling me that as a side hustle, he's buying raw land, pennies on the dollar. He's flipping them online, and he's making a 300% return on his investment. Well, Kyle, I'm looking at companies all day long. And a great company has 15% EBITDA margins or free cash flow. Average companies, 10%. And I'm looking at companies all day long, less than 10%. So I don't believe him. I've got $3,000 saved up for car repairs. I go to New Mexico with him. We go to a tax deed auction. I buy up 10 half-acre parcels, an average price of $300 each. I flip them online, and they all sell for an average price of $1,200 each. It worked. So I took all that money. I went to another auction in Arizona, which is where I live. And again, it's 2000. There's no one in the room. And I bought up lots of acreage for nothing. And over the next 6 months, I sold all that property. I made over $90,000. So I go to my wife, and she's pregnant. I said, honey, I'm going to quit my job, become a full-time land investor. And she's like, absolutely not. So I said, okay. So it took me about 18 months for the land investing income to exceed the investment banking income. And then I quit. I've been doing it full-time ever since. As of now, I've done over 6,000 transactions, and I love it.
Well, real briefly, because it's a huge topic, what do most people not know or understand about being in land investing?
I think they think that it's the playground of billionaires because the biggest landowners are all billionaires. Or they think that it's for people that have lots of time. Let's say you're a land banker. So your traditional model is you buy a piece of raw land, you hold it, you pay the property taxes, it's negative cash flow. And then hopefully you get that hockey stick model. It's flat, flat, flat. And then boom, here comes development and old Jeb is a millionaire. I don't subscribe to any of that. So if you want, Kyle, I'll walk you exactly through my model so that you can do it yourself.
I would love that. And for our millennial listeners that don't know how old Jeb became a millionaire, check out the Beverly Hillbillies every now and again, and you'll get hooked by that intro music, that jingle. So let's hear the model. I'd love to learn about your model.
Okay, so Kyle, you're in Denver, and I'm going to assume you own 10 acres of raw land in Texas, but you owe $200 in back taxes. So you're advertising two important things to me. Number one, you have no emotional attachment to this raw land. You're in Denver, Colorado, the property's in Texas. And number two, you're distressed financially in some weird way. Because when we don't pay for things and you're not paying the property taxes, we don't value them in the same way. As a result, the county treasurer keeps sending you notices saying, Kyle, if you don't pay your taxes, we're going to auction off that lot to a tax deed or a tax lien investor. So all I'm going to do is look at the comparable sales on your 10-acre parcel in Texas. I'm going to take the lowest comparable sale. I'm going to divide by 4. That's going to get me what Warren Buffett would call a 300% margin of safety. And I'm going to send you an actual offer on your lot, on your land, on your 10 acres. So let's say the lowest comparable sale is $10,000. I'm going to send you an offer for $2,500, contingent upon due diligence, taxes, et cetera. So I have a way out. Now you accept it because for you, $2,500 is better than nothing. In reality, 3 to 5% of people accept my quote unquote top dollar deal. But now that you've accepted it, I've got to go through a few things. Number one, I have to do this due diligence or in-depth research. I got to confirm you still own the property. Number two, I have to confirm back taxes are only $200. Number three, I have to make sure that there's been no breaks in the chain of title. Number four, I have to make sure there's no liens or encumbrances. And then I want to find out what's compelling about the property. I want to get the GPS coordinates. I want to see the GIS map. I want to get aerial maps, plat maps. I want somebody out there locally to stomp on the property. What are the neighbors doing? They'll fill out my property checklist. I might pay $50 if it's an area I've never been in. Take pictures, shoot video. I'll pay $11 for my team in the Philippines to go through title search. They're connected to an American title company. That's only because I'm paying $2,500. Now, if I was paying more, let's say $5,000 or more, then I'm going to just close traditionally through a title company. I won't take any self-closing risk. But this is only $2,500, so I feel comfortable. So now everything checks out. I buy the property from you for $2,500. I'm going to sell it 30 days or less, and I'm going to make it cash flow like a rental home. So I have a built-in best buyer, Kyle. Do you know who it is?
Who is it?
It's the neighbors. The neighbors. So I'm going to set out neighbor letters saying, hey, here's your opportunity. Protect your privacy, expand your views, protect your views, and know your neighbor. Oftentimes the neighbors will buy it. Now, if they pass, I'll go to my buyers list. My buyers list passes. I'll go to a little website you may have never heard of. It's called Craigslist. It's the 10th most trafficked website in the United States. I'll go to another one. Facebook, buy sell groups, the marketplace. And then I'll go to the lands, landmodo.com, landandfarm.com, landsofamerica.com, landflip.com, landhub.com. These are platforms where people buy and sell raw land every day. But the way that I'm going to sell it is where I'm going to make it irresistible from a pricing perspective. You want to own that 10 acres? Great. Put $2,500 down, and then I'm going to owner finance the balance. I'm going to make it a car payment. Let's say $249 a month and 9% interest over the next 84 months. So I'm going to get my money out on the down. I might go 6 to 10 months out. And then I'm going to get $249 a month and 9% interest for the next 84 months. No renters, no rehabs, no renovations, no rodents. And because I'm not dealing with a tenant, I'm exempt from Dodd-Frank, RESPA, and the SAFE Act, all this onerous real estate legislation. So then this game that we play is, can we create enough of these land notes where our passive income now exceeds our fixed expenses, and we're working because we want to, not because we have to.
First of all, we're going to have to rewind that back for a second because that's a lot of information in a real succinct period of time. But it's genius. Obviously, you talk to the neighbors first, because a lot of times there's this property that's overgrown or whatever's happening with it, and people always say, "I wish I could just buy that, and then that way I control it, and all the headaches are gone." And you go and find the disinterested, detached owner that's maybe far away, back on their taxes, and you've got the ability to figure out who those people are and then sell it to the most obvious person. I love that. How often do you have a situation where someone actually does sort of that carryback or loan type of situation that you described?
Well, I'm doing the carryback. So I'm the one that wants that passive income. So about 10% of the time, people want to pay cash, which I don't like, because then I got to pay taxes. I got to redeploy the capital. Mm-hmm. 10% of the time, because we don't do credit checks, they default. So great.
You get it back.
I keep all the money. I keep the down. I keep all the payments. I get a new down payment. I get a new buyer, and it just expands out my ROI. So our ROI on our average deal is on a terms deal is 800 to 1200%. On a cash deal, it's only 300 to 500%.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a much better model and really interesting. So that's pretty cool. I've been in commercial brokerage for 17 years and I've never really heard about or thought about this process. So the next question I have for you is that there's this old adage that buy land, God's not making any more of it. Do we ever run out of land? I mean, do you see that happening, being someone that's in the business all the time?
Well, it's so funny you mentioned that, because, people always ask me, like, why are you teaching this to people? Aren't you going to create your own competition? The first person that brought that up to me was my own wife. And she's, because I told her, hey, you know, I want to start teaching this and sharing this. Well, she's like, aren't you going to create your own competition? So if we put our investment banker hat on, I said, okay, well, let's analyze the market. How big is it? So there are billions of acres available of raw land just in the United States. There's 3,007 US counties. There's no hedge funds. There's no private equity groups. There's no big money players in land. There could be 1 million people in this niche. You, me, 1 million people, we're all going to run out of money before we run out of deal flow. So it's just a massive market. You couldn't find a least or a less sexy niche. Like you won't go on HGTV or the DIY network and see flip this land. The before pictures raw land, the after pictures raw land. So it's just not something that, like, you've been doing this a long time. You've never even heard of it.
Yeah, not only have I never heard of it, most land owners are the people who are expecting the highest offer. It's not usually this ability to buy something wholesale and then flip it retail. So most of what I do, if it tends to be land, it tends to be infill parcels. Maybe it's got a house on top of it and it's underutilized, and someone sees retirement by selling this property, which is a very wonderful thing for the people I've been able to help that through. But you think of those as few and far between. Again, you've got to be in the path of development. In your example, it's like there's a plentiful amount of land, and it's just about finding the right person who is in a situation where they shouldn't be the owner of it anyways. They're back on their taxes. They don't like it. It's not nearby. And you repurpose that land and sell it to someone who's the more appropriate owner of it. I love it.
Yeah. It'd be like if I sent you an offer of 25 cents a dollar on everything in your garage, you'd be thrilled. I haven't done anything with it. Like, great, take it.
Yeah, take that old hockey equipment that I don't ever use. And every time I'm back in my shed moving stuff around, I'm like, that hockey bag, I spent a lot of money on it 20 years ago, but does it really do anything anymore? And the answer is no. So it's a great setup. So you've got this book, Dirt Rich, and you go through all of the different parts of your model about how to create passive income with land. What made you decide that you were going to write a book? I know a lot of authors, and that's a very big commitment. It's not an easy thing to do. So what was the process that made you kind of say, okay, I need to write a book about this?
Well, I like the idea. So first of all, I like the model. So just like raw land, it's a one-time sell or a one-time buy, and then I get this recurring income, right? So a book, you just write one time and it outlives you. So, and then I figured I've got 3 kids. I've got at least 3 customers one day that might read the book. Good enough.
Your wife's not sold on it quite yet. She would be the 4th customer.
Oh, she's sick of it. Yeah, no. So, but definitely the kids. So, so that's why. And I thought, I was an English minor in college. Like, how difficult can it be? It turns out, Kyle, it's one of the most miserable things to ever try to do. So it's a really fun challenge, but once it's done, it's wonderful.
Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of authors, some quite famous, and that is usually the commentary, is that it is marathon-esque and can be quite miserable, especially if you've had some success doing it. Then the next one becomes that much more daunting.
I'm working on Dirt Rich 2, the next plot. I'm not joking.
I like it.
And
that's a great title.
It's about how to scale your land business.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. So the landgeek.com, as I cruise around on your website, I love this. Started, 10 years ago. You've got over 4.5 million podcast downloads and counting, almost to 4.6 million podcast downloads, 44,000 Twitter followers, almost 1 million total visits to the site. What can people expect as they step into some of the things that you help with, which is training? You've got coaching resources, a community. If they go to the landgeek.com, what would they go there for? And what do you tend to help people the most with that you coach with?
Right. So really, the number one thing for me is just the awareness, right? So I'm on a mission to help people solve what I call solo economic dependency, which means if they're personally not working, they're not making any money. So think about anybody with a job, a freelancer. We go up the chain: doctors, lawyers, dentists. Dentists' hands aren't in someone's mouth. They're not generating any revenue. So how do we solve this? And I make the argument that I've got the best passive income model. It's a one-time sale. You get recurring income every single month with no headaches. There's nothing to maintain, nothing to protect, and you don't have to deal with any onerous legislation. The only thing I think better, Kyle, than my model, and I write this in my book, there's only one, I think it's the best business model, is life insurance. Because life insurance is a one-time sale. You get that recurring passive income, but you don't even have to buy anything. It's just an idea. There's nothing better. The only problem with life insurance is that you're the least popular person at a party. It's not that much fun, and it takes about 10 years to really move the needle. So I think I've got at least the second best passive income model. So if you go to Land Geek, if you are one of those people who, maybe your money problems are solved, or maybe they're not solved, but I want to help you solve your money problems and your time problems, so that once you've got your money problems and your time problems solved, you can move up what I call Maslow's hierarchy of needs into self-actualization. And you can really do the things you really want to do in life. Like, what is your true purpose in life? And so many times I'll talk to people and they've got big plans, but they're just exhausted. They have what I call scarcity mentality. They go to bed feeling like they didn't get enough done that day. And they wake up feeling like they didn't get enough sleep. And then they're just too exhausted to work on the contribution part of their lives. So I want to help people shortcut that. And I think this is the perfect model to do it, because once you start learning about it, you realize, like, I work 30 minutes a week in Frontier Properties because we have inexpensive virtual assistants and software running the business for us. So we want to build another job for yourself.
So I think there's obviously a skeptic out there that listens and says, this is too good to be true. This is some crazy, maybe ill-conceived type of thing. It couldn't work for me. Speak to that skeptic and maybe share some really positive experiences where you had a student, you had someone that you taught this model to. Obviously, you've done it well yourself, but where they were and where they are today. What's the testimonial?
Yeah, I mean, you can go on the website and see all these testimonials, but the one that was most recent for me is I was just at boot camp last weekend. We do a 2.5-day live training event. We were in Vegas, and don't worry, we social distance. People wear masks. And after the event, this guy comes up to me. He's in his early 20s, and he's like, he's had a hard kind of upbringing, and he said that his stepfather gave him my book, Dirt Rich. He said, I'm so proud of you. I guess he graduated, and he's like, read this book if you want to make a lot of money. So he reads the book, he gets the training, and a year later after training, he has done over $150,000 in cash deals. He's made $150,000, but he has now $750,000 of revenue, $13,000 a month in passive income. I mean, in a year. So that really moved the needle in his life, and allows him now the ability, if he wants to quit his job, he can. So, I mean, that's just one of, we have so many examples. I would say that if you just look at me or you hear me, like, I'm no genius. Like, if I can do it, anyone can do it. It literally just takes grit to do. And if you're skeptical, good for you. You should be skeptical. The only way to learn something is to do it, and then discover for yourself if it works for you.
Mark, the thing I really appreciate about the way you just shared all of that is that you come from a background of investment banking and mergers and acquisitions. And, this is an outside looking in observation, but I got my degree in finance, and I've been in commercial real estate for 17 years. And what you tend to find in the banking world or in the investment world is the more complicated, the more confusing, and the more just convoluted it is, the better. And if we could just sit and all sort of postulate about how smart we are and do this and that and run numbers ad nauseum. And I love that you stepped away from that space and took a very simple but obvious, deliberate plan that anybody can implement, and you're just executing like crazy on it. And I think that in and of itself is a wonderful testimonial, because there's so many people that would aspire to be in that exact space that you were in. You experienced it. You're like, this isn't for me. There's a better way. There's a more efficient way. There's a more exciting and fulfilling and rewarding way. And I think that that's really cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
One real quick, just last discussion on the landgeek.com. You've got the Investors Toolkit, which is that DIY course. You've got Flight School, which is a 16-week program if someone wants to really dive in and be a part of an intentional program that they're not running on their own. And then you've got the coaching, which is probably a lot more intensive. What does that look like from an investment standpoint? And how many times do people pick the DIY and they're like, to heck with this, I want to do Flight School? Or how does that journey go as it comes to people opting into your program?
Yeah, I'd say most people do Flight School, and the investment is significant. I mean, it's not, it's like a, semester of college basically, but guaranteed. So that investment you make in Flight School, we guarantee you're going to make that money back 180 days or less if you just show us your work. So we're really confident about it. But the reason Flight School is so special is that it's got execution in real time. So if you've got a full-time job, you may not have time budgeted on your own to do this. But if you go into Flight School, you've made this investment, well, you're with a class. It's like kind of like group personal training, right? You go to the class, the instructor tells you what to do, and everyone does it together. And you don't want to be the one person that's not lifting the weight, right? So that's where Flight School is so special. You can't go into one-on-one coaching until you've graduated from Flight School, so that we're not working on the basics one-on-one. You've already have them. You're already doing deals. You've already shown us what you can do. So, we don't just take anyone into one-on-one coaching either. The Investors Toolkit is for that person that's really disciplined. If you're the kind of person that get up 4:30, 5 in the morning, go to the gym, work out on their own and get results, that's who the Investors Toolkit for.
That's
I'm
brilliant.
Not one of those person.
The Flight School is the prerequisite to the one-on-one coaching, which I can see so many people being like, no, I want to get to one-on-one coaching. It's like, no, you need to demonstrate that you can be in this and learn the basics before we start doing high-level conversations. I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it allows us to see how they work during 16 weeks, and we could get to evaluate them.
That's brilliant. All right, I've got just sort of a fun question before we get towards the back half of our interview, and some personal questions about the man behind the microphone. So the question I have is sort of on the low end and on the high end. What's the biggest parcel of land that you've been a part of, and then what's also the smallest where you're like, can't believe this little this little stamp of a piece of land that we did on a deal?
So the biggest parcel is 640 acres, which is a section of land, but the biggest deal was, I bought thousands of acres from a public company that didn't want the land. They just wanted the mineral rights. It was kind of a convoluted, you'd like this, Kyle, being in finance. It was a Morgan Stanley backed deal. And, then it was a spinoff and another public company took it over. And so I took their land orphans, essentially, subdivided those properties. And, just on that one deal, I made $5 million.
Holy cow.
The smallest parcel is, like a postage stamp, property, like 0.18 acres, something like that.
That's so cool.
But I don't care. If I'm buying it 25 cents, 30 cents on the dollar, I'll buy it.
It's going to have value to someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And like you said, so many of those, it's not development. It's just, I want to control this piece of land because it protects my views. It protects who's going to build next to me. And it's a really cool thing. All right. We're ready for the second half of our interview, Mark. These are some not quite rapid fire questions, but 3 real important, deep questions that we run all of our guests through. You ready for them?
I'm ready.
All right. The first question is an homage to our show, the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast, and our brokerage. I believe that successful people are constantly calibrating. I became mostly familiar with this word about 6 years ago when I was starting my brokerage. And it means to iterate. It means to take experimental results, gauge them against, this is the standard and we're not quite hitting that standard. What do we need to do to take our hypothesis and actually hit it with our actual results? And so I think about calibration in science and mechanics and all sorts of engineering, which I'm not at all an expert in, but I constantly look at that personal growth and say, how do you calibrate your life on a daily basis? What do you do when you get stuck and you need to get unstuck? What do you do when you feel like I'm in a rut? Or further, what do you do from staying out of that rat race or that rut?
Yeah, I think the most important habit I have, I've been doing this for about 10 years now, is meditation. So, and being out in nature. So I'll do a walking meditation, I'll do a sitting meditation. So I try to meditate at least an hour a day and just sit and watch the thoughts and follow my breath and realize that, oh my gosh, everything's just arising and falling and the impermanence of it all. And when you see it clearly, it's hard to get stressed out about anything, because you just know, well, that too will pass, just like everything else. So that's really the best way for me to recalibrate, is just being present and watching in my thoughts and being curious and following my emotions and just saying, oh, well, that's, noting like, oh, it feels like I'm getting angry. Well, what's that all about? Oh, my daughter didn't pick up her clothes. Maybe I'll just let the anger go, take a deep breath and kindly say to her, hey, I need you to pick up your clothes.
All right. So for the top performer out there, and I'm not saying that you are not, but I sense that skepticism with those who are like, give me a break. I got too much to do to sit around and meditate. Where did you come from a certain place where you're like, I need to do this. This practice is important. And how did you start so it was very manageable? You obviously didn't start at an hour. You probably started at a much more manageable time.
I started 10 minutes. I recommend the Waking Up app. The one that Waking Up wasn't even around when I first started. I started with like Calm or Headspace and doing those things, and then graduating to the Waking Up app, which is a Sam Harris thing. So it's just like, working out, right? If you've never worked out before, I tell you to get fit, you got to work out an hour a day. You're like, seriously? But if I said do the 7-minute workout, well, everyone can do it for 7 minutes and get a sweat. So I would start with, 5-10 minutes and then, build up your concentration to that point. But you get to a point eventually where it's like you look forward to, it's like the most peaceful part of your day. I mean, it's great. It's like a superpower.
I'm so glad you said that, because a lot of times people focus on the skeptical side. There's obviously the reward of it, and the fact that you look forward to it. I would imagine, whether you want to call them key like aha moments, whether it's an epiphany or just a big stroke of genius that all of a sudden hits you where you're like, I got to go do that. Has to have been a mountain of those to justify the time and the practice of going through meditation.
Oh, absolutely. It's kind of trippy when you when you experience it. It's kind of hard to describe in words. It's one of those things you have to experience, but once you do, your entire life is changed, and things that would bother you, and you'd watch your thoughts kind of have this internal drama for what could be days, is now down to, minutes. It's amazing.
It's amazing. And you've shared a few apps as good resources. Have you ever been through some sort of personal meditative retreat, or had someone work with you personally to actually develop your meditative practice?
I would love to, but because I've got, 3 kids, I haven't had like a full week to like do a silent meditation retreat without causing too much angst. But I plan on doing that for sure.
Cool. Very cool. Next question is the advice you wish you knew when you were 22. It actually comes from a song that I really particularly enjoy called Dear Younger Me. Now, that advice you wish you knew when you were 22 isn't part of the song, but it's sort of the synopsis of it as I listened to it. The author, the writer of the song, is kind of reflecting on positives and negatives, some high moments in their life, and obviously some maybe dwelling on some low moments, and saying, what I'd give myself advice if I could go back in time, and what would I do if I could write a letter to myself when I was younger. And the typical sort of like avoid the question is, oh, I wouldn't do anything different. But the reality is, I think when you've learned something over a period of time and you have the ability to impart knowledge to others that you might be training, coaching, or just someone who says, hey, Uncle Mark, you've been really successful. What type of advice would you give to me as I'm getting started out? What's the advice you wish you knew when you were 22?
So when I was 22, I wish I knew that it's all going to be okay. Don't take it so seriously, and be, present and more mindful. I wish I started meditating when I was 22. I know it's a cop out because we just talked about it on the first question, but it's really been that big of a game changer in my life, because everywhere I go, there I am. So when I was 23, I traveled for 6 months in Australia. And, I look back on it, it's like a dream now. But at the time, I mean, it was amazing. But I remember lying on this beach, stressing out. I mean, in like, I'm literally, when I think about it now, it was like literally like paradise. I had no, no job. I had no obligations. I had no kids. I wasn't married. And I'm 23 years old on one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, thinking about starting my life and getting a job. And what am I going to do? And stressing out and not being present. And if I knew at 22 to just be completely mindful of that and how fast it goes and how precious each moment is and how it's just all, again, just kind of rising and falling, and not to take it all seriously or too seriously, I'd be a lot happier at in my 20s than I was.
That's a great visual depiction of the irony of being in your 20s. And I can see that where you have the flexibility, you really have this ability to just kind of pack up and go, quite literally, if you're backpacking for 6 months through Australia, or if you just have all these opportunities to learn and they're really, for the most part, they're non-fatal experiences. You don't have the demands of being a parent, being a spouse, having expectations from an employer. You don't have a mortgage. You don't have all these different things in most cases. And yet you're stressed about getting all of that and you're wanting to jump into all of that. It's such a really funny juxtaposition and sort of contradiction of that thought. But I love the visual of you're like, quite literally on about as cool of a paradise type of situation. And your thought process is like, well, what do I do to get started? And how's it going to look? And it's just really interesting how that ambition and that drive sort of competes with how simple life is at that time. Yeah,
absolutely.
I love it. The final question is actually a derivative of that question I just asked you, the Dear Younger Me question. We're almost at 200 episodes of this podcast. My first 5 episodes, on episode number 5, I got a wonderful opportunity to interview my coach at the time, a guy by the name of Chris Oakley. And Chris shared with our audience at that time that he was actually in a mentoring group in his 20s. And the exercise that the mentoring group had was the leader required everybody to read a book called The Principle of the Path by a pastor named Andy Stanley. And the book, the very quick, just, Cliff's Notes version of it is, if you sort of know what your end destination is, it's going to make your start a lot easier, especially if you're in your 20s, but at any phase of life. And it's very much a Stephen Covey, start with the end in mind type of book. And so Chris, reading this book, one of the exercises in the book that Andy Stanley has his reader go through is writing their own obituary. Seems kind of like a morbid type of assignment or task, but Chris went ahead and did it. And he's sharing this with me on episode 5, that really led him to a decade worth of purpose. Very much got to a point of self-actualization through a variety of different roles. And tragically, Chris actually passed away 2 years ago. And as a tribute to Chris, because I know from having worked with him as a coaching client, he was living on mission and on purpose. And I definitely felt like he left he left our game of life a little bit early. There was still some tread on the tire, but he definitely maxed out his experience. And so I now ask people, instead of writing your own obituary, if you had a family member or loved one deliver your eulogy and they were talking about your legacy and what you were remembered by, what would you want to be known for?
Well, I talk about this with my kids all the time. They're like, Dad, you're obsessed with death. I'm not joking. I have an app called We Croak, and 5 times a day.
You are obsessed with death.
I am. I'm reminded 5 times a day of my mortality. So 5 times a day, I think about this, and I think about purpose, and I think about mission, and I think about, well, look, what is my legacy going to be? Because in 3 generations, no one's going to remember me. It's just a fact. And anything I do or don't do, in the big scheme of things, it's not really going to matter that much, right? So I think for me, for my legacy, what I want to be known for is a good ancestor. What were the values? Because I think that's the only thing I can really pass on are my values. So what are the values that are most important to me that I want to leave as a legacy to my children that they can then pass on to the generations? and, hopefully, be that pebble in the pond. So make that impact, and then it ripples out and affects, everyone, not just in my life, but in their lives as well. So I want to be known as that person that helped eliminate that big bucket of stress in people's lives we call money. Because let's face it, Kyle, what does couples stress about the most? 3 things: money, sex, and the kids. Well, I can't help you with the other 2, but if I can eliminate the bucket of money stress and get people out of socioeconomic dependency, I think that's a wonderful legacy to have. I think people will then be able to go and live their higher purpose, their self-actualized lives, and that value then can ripple out and survive me.
Oh, it's beautiful. I love that description. And I think it is really important to be quite aware of our mortality and quite aware of, our ego related to our mortality, and that it's probably, unless you're one of a few different people, and it could be on a negative side or a positive side, 200 years from now, most people are not going to remember Mark or Kyle. There will be some that, may hear about this ancestor of theirs that did great things, and it's because of what they were able to do for that family. But very rarely does it get past that 3rd generation. Most people don't know who their great grandparents or their great grandparents were. And I think that if you have that ability to have that lasting impact on your family in that way, what a wonderful thing. And I can tell you're doing it with the landgeek.com and Dirt Rich. You're impacting far more families than even just what's downline of you, which is such a cool opportunity. So make sure, I say this to all of our audience members, that our guests, they spend a lot of time and energy. They typically are high producing people, but they oftentimes donate their time to the show. And I very much appreciate the time and effort that you've spent here, Mark. And I just say to our audience, go to our guests' websites, go get their books, make sure to go out there and learn more about these people than just the 45-minute interview we do.
Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it.
We didn't talk about your podcast much, but I want to give that an appropriate plug. You do both an interview on Tuesday and then a roundtable discussion on Thursday, The Art of Passive Income on Apple Podcasts. And what are some of the cool conversations you're having on the podcast, Mark?
So, we have really cool guests, best-selling authors, real estate experts, people that will really have a big impact in your life. And then on Thursdays, we have our Land Geek coaches talking about a pain point in land. And then we, talk about how we solve it. And we have a lot of fun. So, people love our podcast because we take the business seriously, but we don't take ourselves very seriously. So it's a lot of fun.
I like that. Mark Poldolsky, thanks for your time, effort, energy, for your wisdom. I also have to give a shout out to Interview Valet for setting up this interview. They're great, and they've connected us with so many wonderful guests. A big shout out, of course, to our podcast producer, Ann Russell, who's making this episode go every single week. I'm Kyle Malnati, the host of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. And I'd love to say, Mark Poldolsky and I, we will see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.